Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking into a case that I think kind of throws a wrench into that whole idea of a picture-perfect life.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you live in this tight-knit community. You know, everyone knows you, respects your family. Your husband's a beloved police detective,
Right.
a pillar of the community.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he's the prime suspect in your murder.
It's a complete flip of the script on everything that you think you can trust in an authority.
Absolutely.
It's really unsettling.
It really is. And that's what we're unpacking today with the case of Brian and Amy Fanyon. We're going to be looking at the 48 Hours episode, The Detective's Wife, and a fascinating postmortem discussion with the episode producers.
Okay.
So they were really able to offer some insight into the investigation and the trial.
I think what's so interesting about this one is the initial reaction of his colleagues
Oh, yeah.
at the Westfield Police Department. It was total disbelief
Yeah.
and support for him.
Yeah, he came from a well-respected law enforcement family.
Yeah.
His father had also been a detective.
Uh-huh.
They were really active in their church. The Fanyon name was synonymous with integrity
Totally.
in that community.
Yeah.
So,
The last guy you would expect to be accused of something like this. I mean, even the police chief who went on to become the mayor of the town
nice.
testified in Brian's defense and called him like the go-to guy
Wow.
on the force.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense of
Yeah, what his reputation.
what kind of guy he was.
Yeah, exactly. And then enters this secret
Yeah.
Brian's affair with a woman named Corey Knowles.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The affair itself was not physical.
Oh.
Thousands of text messages were uncovered, and they did reveal an emotional connection
Okay.
between the two of them. But there was no evidence of any physical relationship.
So you're saying it was an emotional affair?
An emotional affair.
Okay, so that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely, it did. And you can see that it really created kind of a moral dilemma for him. The producers point out that his internet searches show this real internal struggle.
Oh, wow.
He was researching the morality of affairs, comparing emotional versus physical infidelity. You know, was one worse than the other?
Yeah.
Wrestling with guilt, trying to justify his actions to himself
Yeah.
while maintaining this public image of a happy marriage.
Right. Right. And it's at this point where things start to kind of unravel a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of what Brian's saying.
Right.
To investigators, because initially he had told them that he saw Amy standing with the gun, but then he changed his statement and said that she was sitting.
That's a big red flag right there.
Huge.
Those inconsistencies.
Yeah. And then this whole thing about the gunshot residue.
Both of them tested positive for gunshot residue, which just really muddies the waters,
Didn't the producers mention that he had washed his hands before the police arrived?
They did, and that becomes a big point later on.
Right.
But for now, let's just focus on the gunshot residue itself. He's claiming that he held her hand after finding her, which could explain, how it got transferred to him.
Right.
But then there's this controversy surrounding the lack of residue that was found on Amy's head.
Right.
The defense is arguing that her thick hair could have prevented it from settling there.
Right. And the producers were talking about how hair samples were collected at the autopsy.
Yes.
But not at the crime scene.
That's right.
So they're saying that they may have missed a crucial piece of evidence.
Yeah, potentially.
Like that they could have tested that would have either corroborated or refuted the defense's claim.
Yeah. And the producers even pointed out that photographs seem to show something in her hair.
Wow.
So without being able to test that, it's a mystery.
Yeah, it's like that one clue that you missed in a detective novel.
Exactly.
That could have blown the whole case wide open.
You got it.
And speaking of those clues, Brian's internet searches in the days leading up to Amy's death are...
Just days before Amy died, he was researching gunshot residue testing procedures. And remember, his department didn't even use those procedures.
Right.
Then he searches for how to delete frequently contacted numbers from a phone.
And the morning of Amy's death.
He was deep diving into the specific units within the Massachusetts State Police that handle murder investigations.
Wow. So it seems like he was preparing for something.
Yeah.
Like trying to anticipate every step of the investigation.
Potentially, yeah.
And cover his tracks.
It's a strong possibility.
Yeah, and all of this coming after the whole thing with the infidelity and the internet searches about that and the guilt and the turmoil.
It's a very complex picture.
It is.
Of a man caught between conflicting desires and maybe desperate measures.
Yeah, and the real twist in all of this is that Amy's family was steadfast. in their support for Brian.
Yeah.
They actually signed a letter proclaiming his innocence.
Wow.
They were totally convinced that she had taken her own life.
It's a powerful example of how loyalty can really impact our perceptions.
It is.
And they even described Amy as having kind of a volatile personality.
Right.
They described this thing they called the Amy look, which was just like an expression that she would make when she was unhappy.
Yeah.
And they used this to kind of build this case that she was impulsive and that she could have taken her own life.
Well, wasn't there one member of her family who didn't agree?
Yes, Amy's sister Anna broke ranks with the rest of the family and testified in support of the prosecution's case.
Wow.
Really courageous thing to do, to go against your entire family
Yeah.
in such a public way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But despite that, the unwavering support from her family, the jury ultimately reached a guilty verdict.
They did. Brian was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And the courtroom just erupted.
It did. It was a wave of emotion,
Right.
shock, grief, disbelief. This case had really divided everybody involved.
Yeah, and as we'll discuss in just a second, this story doesn't end there because there are lingering questions and some new developments that have happened that kind of add yet another layer to this whole thing.
Picking up where we left off, I think it's important to kind of dig deeper into the psychology behind why Amy's family supported Brian so strongly.
Yeah.
Even when presented with this evidence, they really clung to that belief in his innocence.
Yeah, it's almost like they were seeing this whole situation through like a different lens, colored by their faith, their love for Amy, and this long-held belief in Brian as this, good guy.
Right. And this is where this concept of cognitive dissonance comes into play.
Okay.
It's basically when you have conflicting beliefs or your actions go against your values, it creates this mental discomfort.
Yeah.
So in this case, Amy's family was confronted with this evidence that challenged this image they had of Brian.
Right.
And to kind of resolve that dissonance, they may have subconsciously downplayed the incriminating stuff and clung even tighter to the belief that he was innocent.
So they created a narrative that allowed them to maintain this positive view of him.
Exactly. And the producers of the episode pointed out some telling details from Amy's mother's testimony.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on, getting justice for her daughter, she seemed more concerned with Brian's well-being.
Wow.
And even brought up instances where Amy hadn't treated Brian well.
Oh, wow.
It's like she was trying to shift the blame away from him.
It's so sad. A mother grieving the loss of her child, but then at the same time defending the man accused of killing her.
Yeah, and it really speaks to how complicated family relationships can be.
Yeah.
And the lengths that we'll go to make things make sense in our own minds.
Absolutely.
Even when the external reality is telling us something different.
Yeah. And amidst all this emotional turmoil, the jury had this incredibly difficult task of putting aside everybody's personal narratives.
Right.
And really just focusing on the facts.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
We can empathize with the family's grief and their struggle to kind of reconcile all of these feelings.
Yeah.
But the jury's job was to be objective.
Right.
And weigh that evidence. And, ultimately they found Brian guilty of first-degree murder.
Yeah.
Which means they found the prosecution's case more convincing.
Right.
Than, the defense's arguments and the family's belief in Brian's innocence.
But even with the guilty verdict, the story doesn't end there because Brian's conviction is actually under appeal right now.
That's right. He's got this high-profile attorney
Yeah.
who's known for getting wrongful convictions overturned.
Yeah, so this just injects like a whole new level of uncertainty into this whole thing.
It does, and it makes you wonder if there's something we've missed.
Right.
A piece of evidence or, some flaw in the prosecution's case that could lead to a different outcome.
Yeah, it's that element of true crime that keeps us all coming back.
Totally.
That there's more to the story than meets the eye.
For sure.
That the truth is out there somewhere.
Yeah. And in this case, with this appeal pending, that possibility is very real.
Right.
And it forces us to ask, well, what if what we think we know isn't the whole story? What if there's another explanation that we haven't even considered?
So how do we as listeners who are, trying to wrap our heads around this whole thing,
right,
and navigate all this uncertainty, like where do we even begin?
It starts with acknowledging that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And that our perspective is limited. We're only seeing what's been presented to us.
Right.
And that information is always filtered through someone else's lens, whether it's the producers of the episode or the attorneys or even the family members.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own biases.
So should we be approaching all this information with Like a healthy dose of skepticism?
I don't know if it's skepticism, but definitely a critical eye.
Okay.
Think about who's sharing the information, what their motivations might be.
Huh.
Are there other interpretations that haven't been explored?
Yeah, it's like we're being asked to become detectives ourselves,
Yeah.
and look at the evidence and draw our own conclusions.
That's a great way to put it. And it's that process of critical thinking, of engaging with the evidence and the arguments.
Yeah.
That's how we can really understand the complexities of cases like this one.
This case is like a maze.
Yeah.
Twists and turns everywhere you look.
Right.
You've got Brian, the respected detective, with this secret affair.
Yeah.
You've got the family grieving but fiercely defending him,
Mm-hmm.
and the community trying to figure out how the Brian they thought they knew could be capable of this.
And then you've got all those lingering questions about the evidence,
Oh, yeah.
the gunshot residue, the deleted phone calls,
Right.
the internet searches.
It's like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but some of the pieces just don't fit.
Exactly. And it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about people.
Yeah.
Like, even the people we trust the most can surprise us.
Right.
Keep secrets.
Yeah.
Make choices that seem completely out of character.
It's like that saying, the heart is deceitful above all things.
Yeah, and I think a Brian Sanyon case really highlights that.
It does.
It challenges us to look at this uncomfortable reality that appearances can be deceiving.
Absolutely.
And that line between guilt and innocence,
Yeah.
it can be blurry sometimes.
Yeah. And as we kind of grapple with all the ambiguity,
Yeah.
we also have to acknowledge that, we weren't there.
Right.
We haven't seen all the evidence.
We're just getting a glimpse.
Right. And we're relying on accounts from other people who, like you said, have their own biases and interpretations.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here?
Well,
The appeal is pending.
right.
There's a chance that new information could come to light.
Right.
But right now we're left with this unresolved tension,
Yeah.
this feeling that there's more to the story than we know.
I think that's what makes these cases so compelling.
I agree.
It makes us think critically,
Okay.
question what we think we know, and accept that sometimes there just aren't easy answers.
Right. Like, we may never know for sure what happened between Brian and Amy.
That's true. And I think it reminds us that the pursuit of justice is rarely black and white.
Yeah.
There are always going to be loose ends and unanswered questions, and the possibility that the full truth might always be just out of reach.
But that doesn't mean we stop looking for it.
No, it doesn't. And it's through these deep dives, exploring these complicated cases that we learn how to navigate those gray areas, to wrestle with uncertainty, and to really understand the complexities of human behavior.
And it's through conversations like these that we can all kind of come to a better understanding of the case and, draw our own conclusions about what happened.
Exactly. The Brian Fanyon case really reminds us that truth can be a slippery thing.
It is.
What we think is real is often shaped by our own biases, our experiences, the information that we choose to focus on.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into The Detective's Wife, we really encourage you to keep thinking about the evidence, the motivations of the people involved,
Right.
and just the complexities of this whole case.
What did you find most compelling?
Yeah. What questions do you still have?
And what conclusions have you drawn based on everything we talked about today?
We hope this deep dive has given you a new way to look at this case and maybe sparked your interest in, exploring human behavior and the search for truth.
Yeah. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.